The man who carried silence. The rain was gentle that morning in Rome. It kissed the stones of the Vatican Square, not with thunder, but with a quiet rhythm that made everything feel more alive. Sundar Pichai stood just outside the ornate gates, his hands tucked inside the pockets of a gray jacket. His breath was steady, but his heart felt like it carried a secret, the kind of secret that doesn't make noise but changes everything it touches. He was not there for a speech, not for a product launch or a panel discussion. No cameras followed him. No reporters screamed his name. This was something different, something sacred. Behind him was a world of machines and code. In front of him was a place older than time, shaped by prayers, pain, and millions of whispered hopes. This was the Vatican. And inside, waiting for him, was the new Pope, Robert Prevost. Few people knew why Sundar had come. Fewer still understood the weight he carried. He had built systems that billions depended on. His choices shaped how the world connected, communicated, even how they searched for meaning. But in recent months, Sundar had begun to feel something strange, an ache, not in his body, but in his spirit. Despite his success, he felt like a stranger inside his own story. He had questions no algorithm could answer. The call had come quietly, 3 weeks before, a letter, written by hand, sealed in old wax. It bore the symbol of the Holy See. Inside were only a few lines. "We believe your voice is meant for more. The new Pope wishes to meet you, not as a leader of technology, but as a human soul." He had not told his board. He had not told his family. Even his closest friend thought he was taking a short retreat. Something about this meeting felt beyond explanation. So he had arrived in Rome alone, without security, without staff, just a small backpack and the quiet courage to walk into a place where power was measured not by reach, but by reverence. As he stepped into the dimly lit corridor inside the apostolic palace, Sundar noticed how the walls breathed silence. Everything was carved with detail, yet nothing screamed for attention. This was not a place of performance. It was a place of presence. An elderly nun led him through the halls. She did not ask questions. She did not smile too much. But there was something peaceful in the way she walked beside him, like she had walked this path 1,000 times with men who had changed the world but didn't understand themselves. They reached a small wooden door. She knocked once, gently, and without waiting opened it. Inside there were no golden chairs, no large paintings, no cameras, just a small table, 2 wooden chairs, and a man in white robes standing by the window, looking out over the city. "Thank you for coming," the man said without turning. His voice was not loud, but it carried deep, like a song you had heard once in childhood and never forgotten. "You are Sundar," he said. "Yes," Sundar replied, his voice quieter than usual. "Then you are welcome here, not as a CEO, not as an engineer, as a man." That was the moment. Sundar felt something shift, something small but undeniable. He had walked into many rooms where people looked at him with admiration or fear. But this man, the new Pope, looked at him like a mirror, not of power, but of truth. "May I sit?" Sundar asked. "You may," Pope Robert said. "But first you must choose something." He turned and pointed to a table by the wall. On it sat 2 cups, one made of polished silver, the other made of clay, chipped at the rim. "Choose the one you will drink from," the Pope said. Sundar looked at both cups. The silver one gleamed with elegance. It looked untouched, perfect. The clay cup was old. It had a slight crack down one side. It looked like it had been used by many hands. Without a word, Sundar walked to the table and picked up the clay cup. The Pope smiled softly and sat down across from him. "That's good," he said. "Because in this place, we do not sip from perfection. We drink from what has been broken and mended." For the next several minutes they said nothing. Just drank water from chipped clay and let silence be enough. Then slowly, the Pope began to speak. "Sundar, the world has been watching you, not just because of your work, but because of how you carry yourself, with gentleness, with quiet strength. But there is something missing, something the world cannot see. Sundar felt his throat tighten. Do you believe in God? The Pope asked. The question landed like thunder wrapped in silk. Sundar paused. Not because he didn't have an answer, but because the answer was more complicated than words. I believe in something, he said. A force, maybe not a person, but something that guides. The Pope nodded slowly. That is enough for now. Then he leaned forward, his eyes locked on Sundar's. But you did not come here to talk about God. You came here because you are afraid. Sundar's heart skipped. It felt like someone had opened a door he didn't know he had locked. What am I afraid of? Sundar asked, his voice low. The Pope looked at him not with judgment but with the stillness of someone who had seen too much to rush. You are afraid, he said, that the world you helped build no longer belongs to the people who need it most. You are afraid that you have created a machine too powerful to understand, and you are afraid that you may lose your soul trying to fix it. The words hit Sundar like rain through glass, not violent, but unrelenting. He leaned back in his chair. Suddenly the room felt too small, too full of truth. Yes, he said finally. Yes, I am afraid. The Pope closed his eyes for a moment, then whispered something so softly Sundar almost didn't catch it. Then you are ready. Ready for what? Sundar asked. Ready to begin again. The Pope reached into his robe and pulled out a small envelope. He slid it across the table. Inside is a name, one you do not know. A child, far from here. She is the beginning of what you must now understand. Sundar looked down at the envelope but did not open it. You will find her, the Pope said, and when you do, you will hear something that no machine, no algorithm, no empire of code could ever predict. Sundar swallowed, feeling a strange mix of fear and hope rise in his chest. Why me? He asked. The Pope stood and walked to the window again. Because, he said quietly, even the strongest minds need to remember what it means to feel helpless. Only then can they learn to love without control. As Sundar left the room, envelope in hand, the nun returned to guide him out. The rain had stopped. The air smelled like earth and new beginnings. He stepped out into the square, his mind racing, his heart quieter than it had been in years. He looked down at the envelope. His hands trembled slightly as he broke the seal. One name, one address, no explanation. A little girl in a village in Kenya. He did not know her. He did not know what he was walking into. But he knew this was no longer about him. It was about something bigger, something sacred, and what waited for him would shake the world. The girl beneath the sky. The flight to Nairobi was long, almost 20 hours from Rome, but Sundar barely noticed the passing time. His thoughts moved in circles, looping through. The moment the Pope had whispered those words, "You are ready." Something about the simplicity of that sentence refused to leave his mind. It echoed in the quiet moments, between the hum of engines and the soft clink of coffee cups served by flight attendants who never once recognized who he was. For the first time in a long time, Sundar felt invisible. Not in a sad way, but in a way that gave him space to breathe. The envelope sat folded in his coat pocket. He had memorized the name already. Her name was Aisha. No last name. Just a village a few miles outside of Kisumu in western Kenya, and a short note written in thin black ink. Listen, don't lead. Let her story shape you. His private driver waited at the airport with a sign that simply read, Guest. No limousines, no tech teams. Just a dusty Jeep and an old man with kind eyes and hands scarred by time. The man introduced himself as Joseph. He spoke in slow, careful English and treated Sundar not as a figure of importance, but as a guest who had something to learn. She is special, Joseph said, as they drove through the chaotic streets of Nairobi and into the open, wide roads beyond. She has dreams that don't match her world, but her heart sees more than most people see in a lifetime. The road stretched long and unpaved. Red dust rose behind the tires and painted, The air. Sundar stared out the window, watching the landscape change. Metal rooftops gave way to straw huts. Concrete walls turned into open fields. Children waved as they passed, some barefoot, some laughing, some with eyes that said more than their mouths ever could. After nearly 8 hours, they arrived at the village. It was smaller than Sundar had imagined. No more than 20 homes, each built with mud and wood, their doors crooked, their windows often covered with old cloth. Goats wandered freely. Smoke rose from cooking fires. Women gathered near a water pump, laughing with a closeness he hadn't seen in Silicon Valley boardrooms. "She lives there," Joseph said, pointing toward a small house with a blue door barely holding onto its hinges. "But she may not be what you expect." Sundar stepped out of the jeep, feeling the ground beneath his shoes firm and honest. Children nearby watched him carefully. He smiled at one who immediately looked away and hid behind a sibling. He approached the house and knocked gently. A woman opened the door, her eyes sharp and warm. "You are the visitor?" she asked. "Yes," Sundar said. "My name is Sundar. I came to meet Aisha." The woman nodded without expression and stepped aside. Inside, the house was dark and cool. The floor was packed earth. The walls were bare. In the corner near a small window sat a girl with a worn notebook in her lap and a pencil tucked behind her ear. She looked up. She could not have been more than 11. Her eyes, though, held something ancient. Not tired, but wise. As if she had learned to see through everything. Pity, fear, even lies. "Are you the man from the letter?" she asked. Sundar hesitated. I suppose I am." "Then you should sit," she said, "because I have something to tell you. But only if you promise not to try and fix it." That one sentence shook him more than any he had heard in years. People usually came to him for solutions. But this girl, this small barefoot girl, wanted him to listen without reaching for answers. "I promise," he said, and sat on the floor across from her. Isha closed her notebook. She did not smile. She looked directly into his eyes like she was scanning him for truth. "Every night," she began, "I dream of building a sky." "A sky?" Sundar asked gently. "Yes. Not the one up there," she said, pointing upward. "A different one. A sky that people can carry. When you look up here," she gestured to the open window, "you see stars, sometimes clouds, sometimes lightning. But in my dreams, people carry their own skies. Some are bright, full of light. Others are gray, heavy, full of storms. I see their skies before I see their faces, and sometimes I see my own sky and it's made of mirrors." Sundar didn't speak. The room felt still, like even the air was listening. "My father used to say the world is like a pot with too many cracks," she continued. "He believed we could fix it with stories, but he died before he could finish his story." Her voice didn't break, but something in Sundar's chest did. "How did he die?" he asked softly. "The water," she said. "It was poisoned from the factory upstream. People in suits came and said it was safe, but it wasn't. He drank it. So did others. Many died. No one came back to ask why." Sundar felt the weight of her words settle deep. He had read reports about supply chains, about environmental impact, about developing nations bearing the burden of progress, but this was not a report. This was a child whose story had no paragraphs, no numbers, just truth. "I tried to send letters," she said. "I wrote to people on the internet, to big companies. I didn't know if they read them, but I wrote anyway. And then the letter came from the man in white. He said someone would come who might listen. Not fix, just listen, and that maybe someday that would be enough to change something." Sundar's hands trembled. He thought of the algorithms, the auto-replies, the spam filters. He wondered if her letters had even reached anyone. "Can I see one of your letters?" he asked. Isha stood, walked to a small wooden box and pulled out a stack of folded pages. Each one was handwritten, carefully, in small neat letters. Sundar opened one. The first line read, Dear someone who can see more than numbers. He read in silence. Each letter was a window, into grief, into hope, into questions no data set could answer. When he looked up, Aisha was watching him. Your sky, she said, is very wide, but it has cracks too. Sundar felt tears rise, unexpected and uninvited. You're right, he whispered. Will you carry it? She asked. Your sky, I mean. Will you stop trying to fix other skies until you learn to hold your own? He nodded. Outside, the sun had begun to set, turning the horizon a deep orange. The air smelled of smoke and soil, and somewhere in the distance a goat bleated like laughter. Isha reached out and handed him one last piece of paper. It was a drawing. 2 skies, one bright, one broken. In between them was a single thread connecting the two. That's the thread we're all walking, she said. Some fall, some lose it, some never see it. But if you find someone to walk it with you, the sky doesn't feel so heavy. Sundar folded the drawing and placed it carefully in his jacket. Thank you, he said. Isha stood, walked to the door and opened it. It's not over, she said. He told me you would have to choose again, and this time it won't be a cup. Sundar stepped into the evening light. He turned back, but she had already closed the door. Joseph was waiting beside the jeep. Did you find her? He asked. Yes, Sundar said, and she found me. They drove back in silence, the stars rising one by one above them. Sundar looked up, wondering what his sky looked like now. But deep down, he already knew. And far away, in Rome, Pope Robert opened his eyes, smiled faintly and whispered, Now, he begins. The silence between questions, the return to Rome felt slower than before. Maybe it was the weight Sundar carried now. Words etched into memory, a child's truth echoing in places no code had ever touched. He sat by the plane's window, watching clouds pass like slow thoughts. He wasn't sure who he was anymore. He had left Rome a man who built systems. He was returning as someone unsure whether those systems still served the people they were meant to. His phone was off. He had left it off since the day he left for Kenya. The silence had become something sacred. It was not emptiness. It was space. Space where memories could stretch out and breathe. He thought of Aisha, of the drawing she had given him, of the way her eyes carried both wisdom and ache. Most of all, he thought of what she said before closing the door. He told me you would have to choose again, and this time it won't be a cup. As the plane descended, Rome greeted him not with grandeur, but with rain. It was heavier now, not soft like the first time. It drummed against the roof of the car that waited for him. This time, there was no nun at the Vatican gate. Just a young man in simple clothes who handed Sundar a plain card with one word: catacombs. He didn't ask questions, not yet. He was driven through narrow streets past ancient buildings that had outlived empires until they reached a quiet corner of the city. Few tourists visited. The entrance was small, carved into stone. It looked like a forgotten memory. A priest waited there, thin and gray-bearded, his hands folded, his eyes distant. You came, the priest said, as if Sundar had always been meant to arrive. What are we doing here? Sundar asked. We are going down, the priest replied. Sometimes the only way to rise is to first descend. They walked through a narrow tunnel, lit only by torches along the wall. The air was cool, damp, and heavy with history. Bones lay stacked in some corners. Inscriptions in faded Latin whispered about lives long gone. Sundar didn't speak. He simply followed. At the lowest chamber, there was a room with a single bench. On it sat Pope Robert, his robes less white now, stained slightly by the earth. You found her, he said. Yes, Sundar replied. And what did you learn? Sundar sat slowly, the drawing still folded in his pocket. I learned that no technology can carry grief. I learned that a child can see things we forget to look for. And I learned that maybe I've spent too long trying to answer questions no one was asking. The Pope nodded, his eyes studying Sundar like a teacher watching a student finally find his own voice. Good, he said. But the journey isn't finished. The world is not shaped only by grief. It's shaped by what people do with their grief. And now you must meet someone who chose something different. Who? Sundar asked. A man who once had everything, the Pope said, and gave it away for nothing. They returned to the surface before the sun rose. The Pope handed Sundar a small envelope. Inside was a photograph. It showed a man in a wheelchair, sitting by a dusty road with a small bag of books beside him. His name is Benedetto, the Pope said. He once led armies of money. Now he teaches children in ruins. You will find him where roads collapse, and no map dares to mark. Sundar's flight took him next to Beirut. The journey was rougher this time. The roads from the airport led not to hotels or conference halls, but into parts of the city still broken from years of conflict and neglect. Buildings stood half-fallen. Wires hung like broken promises. In one alley, children played soccer with a crushed plastic bottle. Their laughter cut through the dust. The local guide, a woman named Layla, was young, fearless, and quiet. She wore a headscarf, spoke with precision, and drove like someone who didn't expect the brakes to work. "You're here for Benedetto?" she asked, without looking at him. "Yes. You won't find answers with him," she said. "But you may lose some questions." They reached the edge of the city, where buildings turned to tents and tents turned into tarps tied between trees. This was the place forgotten by the systems of the world. No Wi-Fi, no running water, no promises. Benedetto was sitting beneath a tree, his wheelchair crooked on uneven ground. He wore a coat with too many patches and eyes that looked far past the present. Around him were children, barefoot, seated in a circle. He was reading to them from a torn book in Italian, pausing every few lines to explain the story in Arabic. Layla leaned in. He used to be a banker, maybe the biggest. One day he walked out and never went back. Said money can't feed the soul of a child. Sundar watched from a distance. Benedetto didn't notice him until the children had gone. "You are not from here," Benedetto said without turning. "No," Sundar replied. "But you've been looking for something," the old man said. Sundar walked closer. "How did you know? People who carry too many questions always walk like they're lost, even when the path is clear." Sundar sat beside him, on the bare earth. "Why did you leave?" he asked. Benedetto looked at him then. Really looked. "Because I was dying," he said. "Not in body, in soul. Every dollar I earned cost me a piece of something I couldn't name. I built a fortress of numbers, but inside it, I could not breathe." "So you came here?" "No," Benedetto said. "I fell here, like a seed thrown into broken ground. I thought it would be my end, but it became my beginning." They sat in silence for a while. "What do you teach them?" Sundar asked. "Truth," Benedetto said. "Not the kind that fits in books, the kind that hides in eyes, in hunger, in laughter, in quiet." "And does it help?" "No," he said, "but it heals." Sundar closed his eyes, remembering Aisha's drawing. The thread between two skies. "I met a girl," he said. "She draws skies. She said we carry them inside, us." Benedetto smiled faintly. "Then she sees what most people never do." Sundar pulled the drawing from his pocket and handed it to Benedetto. The old man stared at it for a long time. "This," he said, "is the world. Broken, beautiful, and stitched together by people brave enough to care." Before Sundar could respond, Benedetto leaned in and said something unexpected. "But you were not sent here only to listen." Sundar frowned. "What do you mean?" Benedetto pointed to the drawing. "Look closely. There, along the edge of the paper, almost hidden in the lines of the thread, was a mark Sundar had not seen before. A single number, written in faded pencil. 19.743. "A date?" Sundar asked. Benedetto nodded. "And a place." He reached into his coat and pulled out a scrap of paper. It had an address, somewhere in France, in the village of Oradour-sur-Glane. "Go there," he said. But be warned, some stories are not meant to comfort. They are meant to change you. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a red glow over the camp, Sundar stood. He thanked Benedetto and turned to go. One last thing, the old man called out. Sundar stopped. Don't try to carry all the skies alone, Benedetto said. Some burdens are meant to be shared. Sundar nodded, though the weight in his chest felt heavier than ever. As he walked back through the broken streets, toward the airport, toward whatever waited in France, he realized something terrifying and beautiful. He had started this journey thinking he needed answers. Now he understood. He needed to learn how to carry questions. The village that remembered fire, the rain followed him to France. But it was not the warm kind that falls with grace. It was cold, thin, and sharp, like memory returning after too long. Sundar stepped off the train in Limoges, the nearest town to a place that, according to Benedetto, no map could explain. The address in his pocket was scrawled in the same hand as the number he found hidden in Aisha's drawing, 19.743. He didn't know what it meant. Not yet. But it carried weight, like a locked door waiting for a key. A car took him through narrow countryside roads. Fields stretched endlessly, green and wet. The landscape looked peaceful, untouched. But as they drew closer, something shifted. The air felt heavier. The trees seemed quieter. The birds did not sing here. You sure about this place? The driver asked in broken English, eyeing Sundar through the rearview mirror. I don't know, Sundar said honestly. The car stopped beside a simple iron gate. Beyond it lay the ruins of Oradour-sur-Glane. Sundar stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath his shoes. The driver did not wait. The engine faded into the distance, leaving only the wind and a silence that felt unnatural. He walked through the gate. The village was dead, but not abandoned. Buildings stood half destroyed. Stone walls blackened by fire. Rusted cars still sat. In the streets, their metal frames twisted like sorrow made solid. Broken bicycles leaned against collapsed doorways. Sewing machines, melted and cracked, sat where women once worked. This place had not been rebuilt. It had been preserved. As it happened, no guards, no loud signs. Only small plaques on the walls, each one a whisper from the past. Here women and children were burned. Here men were shot against the barn wall. Here silence is kept, because memory demands it. Sundar walked slowly, unsure what he was meant to find. He entered what remained of a church. The roof was gone. The pews had turned to ash decades ago, and yet something sacred remained, as if the walls still remembered prayers that would never be finished. A woman stood near the altar, lighting a candle. She was old, her back curved with age, her fingers trembling as she struck the match. Sundar watched her, unsure whether to speak. You came late, she said without turning. I didn't know I was coming at all, Sundar replied. But still you came, she whispered, her voice almost too quiet for the space. Do you live here? He asked. No one lives here, she said. We only visit, because the dead never left. She turned slowly, her face lined with time and sorrow. You carry her drawing, she said. Sundar froze. Aisha, the woman said, the child with the skies. How do you know her? Sundar asked. The woman smiled faintly. I don't. Not in the way you mean. But her drawing, it reached here, long ago, before you touched it. Sundar reached into his coat and unfolded the worn page. She pointed at the number, 19.743. That was the date the soldiers came, she said, but you won't find it in history books as it really was. What happened? Sundar asked. They locked the villagers in the church, she said, mostly women and children. They set it on fire, shot the ones who tried to run. Others were burned alive. Some begged, some stayed silent. The men, they were taken to barns. Machine guns finished what fire began. Sundar looked around. The stones, the silence. It was all part of the same story. But why? He asked. The woman's eyes didn't flinch. Because evil doesn't need reasons, it only needs silence from those who know better. She walked over to a broken window looking out. This place was left as it was. Not as punishment, not as tribute, as a warning. "Why am I here?" Sundar asked. "What does this have to do with me?" "You build systems," she said. "But systems forget, stories remember. You came to learn what data cannot teach." "What do I do with this story?" he asked. She stepped closer and touched his chest gently. "You carry it. Not with pride, not with shame, with reverence. The kind of reverence that changes what you create, that softens how you lead, that reminds you the world is not made of lines of code. It is made of lives. Fragile, short, real." She handed him a photograph. It was a child's shoe, blackened and curled by fire. "This is the only thing they found whole," she said. When the smoke cleared, Sundar stared at it, his throat tight, his mind racing. He wanted to ask 100 questions, but none came out. "Leave it here," she said. "Don't take the picture, take the story." As he turned to leave, she called after him. "You will receive another message soon, from someone who speaks with no voice. Listen closely. The loudest truths are often whispered." Sundar stepped back into the broken village, but something in him had changed. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt sacred, filled with things no algorithm could decode. On the train ride back to Rome, he didn't read, didn't check his phone. He just stared out the window, letting the past speak in its own way. And when he reached his hotel that night, there was a note waiting for him at the front desk. No return address, no signature, just 6 words. "You must now face the mirror." The man in the mirror, the wind that morning in Rome, was sharp. Not cold enough to bite, but strong enough to carry whispers. Through the narrow streets, as if the past had learned how to speak again, Sundar Pichai stood at the window of his hotel, staring at the skyline, the dome of St. Peter's rising like a question too big for words. He held the small note in his hand, the one that had greeted him upon his return from France. It said, "You must now face the mirror." He hadn't slept. His thoughts had tangled through the night, twisting around the sound of fire and the stillness of ashes. Ordure sur Glane had scarred something inside him. Not just the history, but the silence. The absence of answers. The weight of a child's shoe surviving where voices did not. He had come on this journey hoping to understand something greater than himself. Now he was beginning to fear that understanding might also undo him. He dressed without rushing, putting on simple clothes. No tailored suits, no logos, no watch. Just fabric, just breath, just skin. He walked out onto the empty morning streets, feeling the stone beneath his shoes, his footsteps echoing louder than usual. Rome was never truly quiet, but that morning, it seemed to hold its breath. He arrived at a small chapel tucked between buildings that leaned in toward one another like old friends. A nun waited at the door, not the same one from before. This one was younger, with a scar that ran along her jaw, half hidden by her habit. "You are Sundar," she said without asking. "Yes." "Then the mirror is ready." He followed her, through a side corridor, down a short flight of steps and into a small circular chamber lit only by oil lamps. There was no gold, no paintings, just stone, soft shadows, and something unexpected. In the center of the room stood a tall mirror. Its frame was iron, rough, and unpolished. The glass was not smooth. It rippled slightly, distorting reflections, like water touched by wind. "Stand before it," the nun said. "Look until you see what doesn't belong." She left him alone. Sundar approached the mirror. At first, he saw only himself. Tired eyes. Lines on his face he hadn't noticed before. A face recognized across continents, now stripped of stage, lights and applause. He watched himself breathe. Watched his shoulders rise and fall. Then something shifted. He blinked. His reflection did not. He took a step back, startled. The reflection stood still, but then slowly, almost too slowly, it began to change. It grew younger. The lines faded. The eyes became brighter. And then he was looking at himself at 16, a thin boy from Chennai, sitting by a window with a notebook in hand, dreaming of circuits and silicon. And then the mirror shifted again. He saw his hands, older now, signing a contract that would change the tech world forever. Then it showed him boardrooms, power, decisions. Some he remembered with pride, others with guilt. He saw the moment he approved an expansion into a region where oversight was weak. He saw the graphs, the targets, the revenue, and then he saw the children, drinking water that made them sick, dying. And the letters like Aisha's, ignored, flagged as low priority, buried in inboxes he never read. The mirror did not accuse him. It simply showed him what had always been there. "Stop," he whispered. But the mirror did not stop. He saw a server room, rows and rows of machines, each glowing light a heartbeat. And in the silence between the beeps and hums, he heard something unexpected, a voice, small, trembling. "Do you see me now, Aisha?" He fell to his knees, the weight of the mirror's truth pressing down like gravity. He buried his face in his hands, but the images kept coming. His own face on magazine covers, smiling while the world outside burned slowly in the shadows. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't know." But the mirror had one final image. It was not of him. It was the Pope, sitting alone in a dark room, praying, then writing, folding a letter, sealing it with wax. And in that moment, Sundar understood. The Pope had not chosen him because he was powerful. He had chosen him because he was unfinished. And then, the mirror went dark. He sat in silence, shaking. The nun returned quietly, as if summoned by grief itself. "You saw," she said. "Yes," Sundar whispered. "And what will you do with what you saw?" He did not answer right away. She handed him a small object wrapped in cloth. He opened it. It was a tiny sky, not drawn, not painted, stitched. A replica of Aisha's drawing, sewn carefully with thread. The bright sky, the broken sky, and the line that joined them. On the back, a name was stitched in tiny letters. "Eleanor." "Who is Eleanor?" Sundar asked. "She was the first," the nun replied. "Before Aisha, before Benedetto, before even the Pope." "The first what?" "The first to carry her sky into fire and then come back with light." The nun placed a hand on his shoulder. "Go to her." "Where?" "She waits in the place where stars don't rise." He looked at her, confused. "I don't understand." "You will," she said, "but only if you go without seeking to be understood." She handed him another envelope. No address, just a drawing of a lighthouse. As Sundar left the chapel, the world outside seemed louder, faster, full of people rushing through lives they barely noticed. He walked slowly, each step heavy, each breath uncertain. But inside him, something steady had begun to grow, not confidence, not clarity, but something deeper. Humility. The kind that doesn't bend the world, but listens to it. And as he reached the street, a child passed by and looked up at him with quiet curiosity. For the first time, in years, Sundar smiled with no purpose behind it, just presence. And far away, in a place untouched by satellites or speed, an old woman with silver hair looked out at the ocean, holding a candle beside a crumbling lighthouse. She whispered a name, not loudly, not with expectation, just enough for the wind to carry. Sundar. The whisper that changed everything. The sea was the first thing he heard, not the waves crashing, but something deeper, a rhythm older than language. It moved with patience, like time itself taking long breaths. Sundar stood at the edge of a cliff in Brittany, France, staring at the gray ocean below. Behind him stood the old lighthouse, weathered by storms, its light long dead. It looked more like a ruin than a guide, and yet, the candle in the window burned steadily, placed there by someone who had waited too long for reasons others had forgotten. The path to the lighthouse had not been easy. It had taken him through forgotten villages, across salt flats, and up winding roads barely wide enough for a car. The air here smelled of salt, stone, and memory. It was quiet, not silent, but full of a different kind of sound. The kind that lives between thoughts. The kind that asks questions with no words. The door to the lighthouse was already open. Sundar stepped inside. The wood creaked beneath his feet, and the wind hummed through cracks in the stone like a song sung in morning. He climbed the spiral, stairs slowly, one hand on the cold rail, the other gripping the envelope with the lighthouse drawing. He hadn't opened it. Something in him knew he wouldn't need to. At the top of the stairs, a small room waited. It was filled with papers, maps, stitched pieces of fabric, broken watches, photographs of places that no longer existed, and in the center, seated in a worn chair beside the candle, was a woman. Her hair was long and silver, falling over her shoulders like moonlight made quiet. Her hands trembled slightly as she stitched thread into a piece of cloth. Her back was straight, her face lined not just by time but by choices. "You found me," she said without looking up. "Are you Eleanor?" Sundar asked. "No," she said. "Eleanor is just a name. But yes, it's the one I carry." She put down her needle and finally looked up at him. "You've seen the girl," she said. "Aisha," he replied. "And the fire." "Yes. And the mirror." He nodded. "Then you are ready." "For what?" Sundar asked. She stood slowly and walked to the window. Outside, the wind picked up, pulling the sea into restless movement. The candle flickered but didn't go out. "You built something bigger than yourself," she said. "And now it lives beyond your reach." "Yes," Sundar whispered. "And I don't know if I can control it anymore." "You can't," she said. "That's the mistake many make. Trying to control what was never meant to be caged." She picked up a folded piece of fabric and handed it to him. It was another sky. This one different, darker, stitched with jagged lines and red thread, running through the center like a wound that had tried to heal but never closed. "Whose sky is this?" he asked. "Mine," she said. "And maybe yours too." She sat again, her breath a little slower now. "Do you know what makes a system dangerous?" she asked. "Scale," Sundar guessed. "No," she said. "Forgetting." He waited. "When systems forget the people they were meant to serve," she said, "they become something else, not evil, just empty. And emptiness is what allows evil to grow." Sundar felt the truth of it hit somewhere below thought. "Then how do we stop it?" he asked. She looked at him. Her eyes did not waver. "We don't," she said. "We remember, and we teach others to remember." "But how?" His voice cracked. "I've led for years, I've spoken to millions, and yet I feel like I never said anything real." She smiled faintly. "Then it's time to speak differently." She pulled from the drawer a small device. Old, dusty, a recorder. "The Pope gave me this," she said. "Years ago. Told me to wait for the one who needed to hear his voice at the right moment." She pressed play, and the voice of Pope Robert Prevost filled the room, low and full of stillness. "If you are hearing this, Sundar, then the world has not yet ended. And that means there is still time. Time to return to what matters. Time to lead. Not with answers, but with presence. You must build again, not systems, but trust. Not empires, but communities. You must use your voice not to rise above others, but to lift those who are buried beneath your progress. When you return, go not to the boardroom. Go to the people. Sit in the schools, in the shelters, in the fields. Ask no questions. Offer no solutions. Just listen. And then, only then, speak. And when they ask you why you came, tell them the truth. Tell them it was a girl who drew the sky. A banker who gave everything away. A village that remembered fire. And a mirror that refused to lie." The recording stopped. The room was silent. Again, Sundar felt something inside him break and then rearrange itself. Not like a shatter, more like a seed opening. He closed his eyes, the sounds of the sea wrapping around him like a blanket. "What do I do now?" he asked softly. Eleanor stood and handed him a letter, sealed with wax. You take this to them, she said. To the people who think leadership is only about power. Let them hear the whisper. What whisper? She smiled for the first time. The one that says, we belong to each other. Sundar left the lighthouse as the sky began to break open with light. Not sun, not yet. But a softness, a beginning. He walked down the cliff path slowly, clutching the letter, the fabric skies, and the memory of every face he had met. Aisha, Benedetto, the woman in Orador, the mirror, Eleanor. And somewhere deep inside him he knew he would never go back to being the same. Not because he had found the truth, but because he had learned how to carry it, with humility, with courage, with quiet hands. Weeks later, the world watched a video uploaded without fanfare. It featured no product, no launch, no announcement. It was Sundar sitting on the floor of a classroom in Kenya beside Aisha. He was not speaking. He was listening. And when the time came to talk, he said only this. We forgot how to see each other, but we are learning again. Not from systems, from stories, from skies drawn by children, and from the whisper that says, we were never meant to walk alone. And for the first time in years, the world went quiet, not because it had nothing to say, but because someone had finally said what mattered, and the whisper traveled, country to country, screen to screen, heart to heart.